Hi, I'm Kaylee, and these are the classics that I want to reread. In case you didn't know, Books for MKs is a charity that donates books to missionary kids all over the world. If you want to donate to the kids, you can do so at GoFundMe.com. There's a link down in the description and a button at the end of this video if you want to donate to the kids. So when it comes to classics, I don't often reread. Many classics are long, and it just requires quite a commitment to sit down and reread a classic. But these are the ones that are so wonderful, and they are so much my favorites that I would definitely sit down and take the time to read, a 700-page novel. Some of these aren't really that long, but a lot of the time, classics do tend to be long some of the time. So number one on this list is actually one of my top 3 favorite classics in the whole wide world, and I can't believe that I've only read it once. How did that even happen? And it is Charles Dickens' David Copperfield. It is my number 1 favorite Dickens, and it's one of my top 3 favorite classics. David Copperfield follows its main character, David Copperfield. He's an orphan, and he's sort of adopted by this great aunt, and she's sort of a little bit crazy. She's certainly very eccentric, and she sends him to school, and he grows up, and it's just kind of his life story, all the strange little doings and interesting happenings and people that he meets. And of course, it's absolutely wonderful. It's Dickens. There's so much detail, and the plot is amazing. And this is one of the Dickens that is actually semi-autobiographical, because some of the things that happened to David Copperfield actually were things from Dickens' life. Number 2 is Waverley by Sir Walter Scott. This is definitely my favorite book of Sir Walter Scott's, and it's also, I think, the first book by Sir Walter Scott that I ever read, although I might have read Ivanhoe first and then I read Waverley. Either way, it's wonderful. Interestingly enough, Edward Waverley actually made it onto my favorite classic heroes, and I will link that video up here and down below. In Waverley, this young man travels up into Scotland. He falls in love, of course, and he sort of gets in the middle of all this brouhaha and wars and battles, and he's just a young man who doesn't really know where he stands in the middle of all this political craziness. And he becomes a man, and he finds out, how to stand up for himself and that sort of thing. Next is North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is the story of Margaret, who moves from a beautiful countryside town to an industrial town, and it's very jarring to her. And she meets John Thornton, who is the owner of a cotton mill, and at first they do not get along, and then naturally they fall in love. Next is another Elizabeth Gaskell novel, Wives and Daughters. Molly's mother passed away when she was very young, and now her father is going to remarry a woman who has a daughter of her own. And so she not only gets a new stepmother, she also gets a new stepsister. And it's all about how this family, they're keeping secrets from one another, and there's a lot of drama going on. And in the end, of course, they come together as a family. Next is a classic that I read, oh my goodness, it must be 10 years ago, longer than that, probably more like 15 years ago, The Cloister and the Hearth. And I really don't remember a lot about this one, except that I just remember how much I loved it. It's about a priest who is really dealing with, he wants to be spiritual, but he is tempted by the world. There's a lot of drama, and it's very heartfelt, and there's a lot of philosophical, interesting ideas in there. Next, which probably should have been at the very beginning of this list, is Alexandre Dumas' The Count of Monte Cristo. This is another one that makes it into my top 3 classics of all time. And I can't believe that I've only read it once. Oh my goodness, why haven't I read this at least 5 times? Well, I know why, because it's more than 1,000 pages long. This book is massive, but I remember when I was reading it, it didn't feel that big. I was just so into the story. There was so much action and stuff happening all the time. It didn't feel like this long, dragged out story. There's just so much in there. It's well worth the time, and I so need to reread it. Another great one by one of the Bronte sisters is The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. I've never known whether to say Wildfell or Wildfell, but either way, this one is wonderful. It's about this woman who is the tenant of Wildfell Hall, and she's kind of mysterious and keeps to herself, and nobody really knows what her story is. And of course, some countryside boy falls in love with her and is determined to figure out her secrets. And it's so dramatic, and it's really has such a positive message. And I love how independent she is, living there by herself and everything. It's just wonderful, wonderful storytelling. Next is Rudyard Kipling's Kim, which is, of course, like most of Rudyard Kipling's books, set in India. It's about a young boy named Kim who ends up kind of being a spy for the British, and he's kind of caught in the middle of this whole spying gang, and they're trying to get him to turn over to the other side and all this kind of stuff. But it's a beautiful picture of this historic India told from a really different perspective than what you would think. Next is Jack and Jill, which is about these two young neighbors. Jack lives in one house and Jill lives next door. And of course they grow up together and they become friends. And when Jill gets really ill and is unable to leave the house, then Jack and his friends sort of band together to cheer her up and to help her on her journey of healing. Baroness Orczy wrote sort of a companion novel to the Scarlet Pimpernel series, which is actually set in like the 1930s. Or somewhere around there, somewhere around the 1930s or 40s, instead of being set, you know, in the olden Revolution times, in the French Revolution, like the Scarlet Pimpernel is. This story follows a direct descendant of the Scarlet Pimpernel and the love of his life, Rosemary, as they have German spies that are coming in, and there's a lot of intrigue and a lot of adventure and danger and action, which of course is, you know, wonderful. The next two are by George MacDonald. It's Fantasties or Fantasy. I never know how to say this. I'm assuming it's Greek or something, but whatever. And the other one is Lilith. Both of these are really iconic, beautiful fantasies with lots of imagery and sort of hidden meanings. And I first read these because I had read that they had a big impact on C.S. Lewis, and I love, you know, Narnia and all the Lewis books. So I ended up reading these, and I feel like I didn't really understand it the first time around. There's so much of the imagery and the hidden meanings and like these really, I don't know, like really deep philosophical ideas that if you don't get it, then you're just really lost. So I definitely need to reread these, and hopefully the second time around I'll kind of have a better idea of what's going on, and I'll just be able to make sense of everything. It's really beautiful, but I found myself kind of like scratching my head at the end. And those are the classics that I want to reread. Please leave a comment down below and let me know, are any of these classics that you want to reread, or that you want to reread, or that you want to read for the first time? Or what are some classics that you want to reread? Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.